Hello everyone, this is Group 4 and today we will be talking about the development and prevention of cancer through exercise. I am Yesenia and I am here with Bethany and Alexandria. So what is physical activity? Physical activity is defined as any bodily movement produced by skeletal muscles that result in energy expenditure. It can be categorized into leisure time, also known as recreational activities. So this can include sports, conditioning exercises, and other activities. Household activities, so cleaning or mowing the lawn. Transport activities, so this is how you travel to and from work. So do you walk or do you ride a bike? And occupational activities. So what is a MET? So MET stands for Metabolic Equivalent Scoring, and this is a way to measure energy that is needed to perform a certain type of physical activity. The ratio of associated metabolic rate for the specific activity compared to a standard metabolic rate of 1. So 1 MET is equal to sitting or resting. So for example, if you're doing an activity that has a metabolic score of 6 METs, this is going to require 6 times the energy that is needed while you are sitting or resting. So the lighter the intensity, the smaller the MET score, and the higher the intensity, the higher the MET score. So physical activity levels range from sedentary to vigorous. Sedentary is having a MET score of 1 but less than 1.6, and this is usually just resting or sitting. Light intensity is having a MET score of 1.6 but less than 3. Some examples are fishing and yoga. Moderate intensity has a MET score of 3 but is less than 6. Examples are yard work, so like mowing the lawn, and weight training while using lighter weights. And vigorous intensity has a MET score that is greater than 6. And some examples are circuit training and running. Now if we look at the chart, these are also other examples that fall under light, moderate, and vigorous intensity. Physical activity affect the body. So physical activity can help prevent or reduce the risk of certain cancers, which we will talk later in the presentation. It can also help prevent or reduce certain diseases. Cardiovascular is one, for example, and two of these include heart disease and stroke, which they are also known to be one of the main causes of death in the United States. And it can also help prevent and reduce diabetes. So if you do have type 2 diabetes, you can use physical activity to control your blood glucose levels. And it also provides other health benefits, so better living, so you are able to do everyday activities without falling or injuring yourself. And this would mainly apply for older adults because it is recommended that they stay physically active. Physical activity can also help strengthen your bones. So as we all know by now, as we do get older, we do lose bone density. So it is important that we stay physically active to prevent the loss of bone density, which can also help reduce the risk of falling and injuries. And it can also increase our lifespan. So this relates back to what I had just already mentioned. It's going to help you live longer because your risk of diseases and cancer are lower than those who are living a sedentary lifestyle.
General fit recommendations. So, for aerobic activity, some general fit recommendations are 5 days per week at a moderate intensity. So, a moderate intensity is when you can talk and exercise, but you cannot sing and exercise. And then they want 30 minutes per these 5 days. And altogether, that would equal 150 minutes per week of exercise. Um, for muscle strengthening, they recommend 2 or more days per week at an intensity of all major muscle groups. So this means that we want to focus on all major muscle groups, including hamstrings, quads, and then any other major muscle group. But it's important that we hit all of them, and the time is as needed. So, however long it takes you to do this is what would be the time. So, what is cancer? Cancer is a disease where the cellular machinery responsible for replication, which is making new cells, goes awry, and cells begin to produce too many irregular copies of themselves. As these irregular copies multiply, they form masses called tumors. So basically, this is saying that cancer is a disease that starts in the DNA of a cell. Somehow, some way, the DNA of a cell gets mutated, and cells begin to produce irregular copies of themselves. Uh, these cells grow out of control and eventually form masses called tumors. Different types of cancer. The first type of cancer is colon cancer. The second type of cancer is breast cancer. The third type of cancer is lung cancer. The fourth type of cancer is prostate cancer. The fifth type of cancer is endometrial cancer. The sixth type of cancer is pancreatic cancer. The seventh type of cancer is gastric cancer. And the eighth type of cancer is ovarian cancer or ovary cancer. So the first 3 cancers are talked about in chapter 5 of the book, and the last 5 are talked about in the article given to us for this topic. Of course, these aren't all the cancers, but these are the ones that were talked about in our readings. So these are the ones we are focusing on. The ones that we are specifically focusing on in this slideshow are colon cancer, breast cancer, lung cancer, and endometrial cancer. Physical activity and cancer. So this table is from our article given to us for this topic. This table talks about the summary of evidence for prevention of cancer by physical activity. Colon cancer has the most convincing evidence at an average risk reduction of 20 to 25%. And then breast cancer post-menopause has probable evidence of 20 to 30%. And then endometrial cancer has probable evidence as well to 20 to 30%. The rest of the cancers have limited evidence, but this is mostly just because there isn't enough studies to have convincing evidence for these cancers. Statistics on cancer. 5 to 10% of cancers are categorized as being due to genetics. So this means that the cancer diagnosed, 5 to 10% of those are due to someone's genes. 90 to 95% of cancer is due to environmental factors and lifestyle factors. So this means that 90 to 95% of cancers diagnosed are due to the environment we live in and then how we live our life. So some environmental factors would be pollution in the air, working in an environment with a lot of chemicals, and then some lifestyle factors would be what kind of exercise we do, at what intensity, and then what kind of diet we have. Are we a sedentary person? Things like that. 14% of deaths around the world are due to cancer. Now, if you think about this one, this is a pretty big number because the population in the world is pretty big. So think about the population in the world, and then 14% of that, 14% of those people have cancer. And not only are 14% of those people just living with cancer, there could be more living with cancer, but 14% of those people actually died from cancer. Physical activity and exercise has the most evidence for helping to prevent colon cancer and postmenopausal breast cancers. So, like we saw in the slide before, colon cancer and postmenopausal breast cancer are some of the highest, have the highest evidence for being linked to physical activity and how physical activity can prevent those cancers.
Okay, so now we're going to move on to mechanisms in the body that are correlated with the risk of cancer. There's 5 primary mechanisms, and these include weight gain and fat gain, hormone levels outside of normal values, insulin resistance, immune function, and inflammation. Over the course of the next few slides, I'm going to be going into detail about each of these mechanisms. All right, so the first mechanism that's on our list is weight gain and fat gain. There are 3 main topics within this subject that I'm going to be going over. The first of that is balance. So the balance between the consumption of our energy and expenditure is important. What I mean by this is, so basically we each have our own basal metabolic rate. If we were just to lay in bed all day and literally not do anything else, your body still burns calories, and there's a certain amount of calories that your body burns each day. So on a normal day, when you're not on bed rest or you're not just laying in bed all day, your body still has that baseline, right? But then on a normal day, you're eating food. Hopefully, you're moving around a little bit. Maybe you're not. So basically, to be on one end of the scale, right? If you're on the lower end of the scale, say you're not consuming enough calories, and then on top of that, you go to the gym and work out for an hour, you're going to lose weight. You're going to be on the lower end of that balance. And then on the flip side of that, so say, you're celebrating, you're just going out, you go out to brunch, have some drinks, you have some cake, whatever else. It's a good day, right? You're happy. But very likely you're on the higher end of that balance. So you're probably consuming more calories than your baseline basal metabolic rate. And you're probably not burning a lot of energy, unless if there's some good laughs, because I heard laughing burns calories. But overall, when you're on the higher end of the balance, this leads to weight gain. It also leads to fat gain. So that brings me to my next point. Fat gain, particularly in the abdominal area, is really bad for us. And when we talk about abdominal fat, we also refer to it as excess visceral fat, which is basically fat that's surrounding our organs. And this is bad for us because it disrupts our normal balance and functioning of our hormones. And so now moving on to our next subject, which is just weight overall. So gaining weight and gaining fat, particularly in your abdominal area, increases your risk of developing several cancers. Some of these cancers include colon cancer, breast cancer, endometrial cancer, as well as ovarian cancer. And in the next few slides, I'm going to go into even further detail of why this is the case. Okay, so now we're moving on to hormone levels. And before I really jump into this, I want to begin talking about cortisol, right? It's in big red scary letters because usually when we hear about cortisol, it's like, oh, cortisol's bad, right? There used to be those infomercials for that diet pill, and it would show an overweight person. It would be like, this is all because of cortisol, which is kind of true, but while cortisol gets the bad name as being the stress hormone, it actually has a lot of important functions in our body. And so when we are physically active and we take care of our bodies and our hormones are within normal ranges, cortisol, it's a steroid hormone in our body, and it helps control a lot of things. And some of these things that it helps us control are metabolism, our immune function, inflammation, as well as our ability to withstand illness and injury. So this is when we're physically active. But say you're sedentary, it literally takes those things that it controls and it flips it right over, and it basically makes you have a worse metabolism. It creates inflammation in your body, which can then, decrease your immune function and everything else. Things really go downhill thanks to a sedentary lifestyle and cortisol. Okay, so moving on, we're still talking about hormones. But so in the last slide, I was talking about, the big bad cortisol, the bad hormone. So I'm going to kind of put things on a positive aspect, and I'm going to talk about a good hormone, a happy hormone. And this hormone that I'm going to start off talking about is serotonin. So serotonin is like this super important hormone in our body. It's like all-encompassing. It does so many things. It provides so much utility for our bodies. Some of these things that serotonin does for us is it promotes a good night's sleep. It positively impacts our mood. It positively impacts our social behavior, appetite, digestion. The one caveat to this is, say, if you've ever taken medication for anxiety or depression, particular in SSRI, which stands for a selective serotonin reuptake inhibitor. So basically when you're basically putting more serotonin into your body, this can disrupt your GI tract, and it can actually negatively affect your digestion. But moving on, back to the happy things. Some other good things that serotonin does for our body is it positively impacts our memory. It makes our memories better. And it also improves our sexual function. There's all these good things that serotonin does. And the cool part is when we exercise, when we're physically active, our body releases serotonin. So basically, if you want any of those good effects, exercise, you'll release serotonin. So another hormone that is released when we exercise is the one, that I think most of us think of right off the bat. We hear dopamine and we're like, yes, this is our happy little smiley yellow guy right here, right? He's our feel-good neurotransmitter. And then also exercise can keep our male and female sex hormones in check. The one thing about this though is like there's a regular recommended physical activity, and then there's, say, you're being sedentary, your male and female sex hormones can be negatively affected. And some ways that this can be affected is like a decrease in libido. And on the other side of that, so say you're exercising too much, you're practicing some like super extreme excessive exercise practices, particularly in women, you can see some symptoms such as stopping having your period because you're exercising so much. You're losing all of this essential body fat because both males and females need a certain amount of body fat. Like, we talk about fat like, oh, fat bad, which too much fat is bad, but we do need some fat. Fat does play an important role in our bodies. Moving on to insulin resistance. Before I really dive into this, I kind of just want to mention one of the reasons that I really kind of concentrated on cortisol a couple slides back is because when we're in balance, when we're physically active, cortisol keeps all of these things in check with our body. But when we're sedentary, cortisol is kind of like this catalyst, right, that just starts this never-ending circle of bad things happening in our body. And one of these things that cortisol does in our bodies when we're sedentary is it renders our cells to be resistant to insulin. So when we're talking about insulin resistance, we basically are saying that your cells are resistant to the hormone insulin. And when your cells are resistant to insulin, your blood sugar increases. And when your body is showing signs of insulin resistance, this increases your risk of developing type 2 diabetes as well as cardiovascular disease. Okay, so now we're going to talk a little bit about our immune function. And so, there's three main things that I feel a lot of people do that negatively impact your immune function. And some of these things are smoking nicotine in particular, stressing ourselves out, right? Like you're working full time and you're going to school full time, and you're trying to be social and also get a good night's rest and be a good student, and it's it can be very stressful, and this negatively impacts our immune function. And also, even though it's so socially acceptable and it's something that the majority of people do, alcohol also negatively affects our immune function. But anyways, moving on. So basically, these are some things that a lot of people do that negatively affect immune function. But regardless of this, basically it doesn't matter your age, your sex, your gender. You could be, it doesn't matter. So it's your age, sex, gender, and if you're smoking cigarettes and you're just stressing yourself out, right? And you're drinking alcohol on a regular basis. When you add a sedentary lifestyle to that, you're literally taking a bad thing and making it worse. And this is tied to an increased risk for premature death. Okay, so now we're going to talk about inflammation. And so kind of what I mentioned earlier concerning cortisol, when we're sedentary, cortisol, right, starts this catalyst in our body and starts all of these bad things happening. It, makes us gain weight, as well as it increases the inflammation in our body. So I kind of wanted to go over the two major types of inflammation. On one hand, there's acute inflammation, which is basically short-term inflammation, and some 5 key signs of acute inflammation. They're pain, redness, heat, swelling, as well as loss of function. So like an example of acute inflammation could be like a rash, or say you got a nasty paper cut. Those are the worst, right? And so, with like, say, the paper cut, you're definitely experiencing pain, you're experiencing redness, there might be some swelling. And so that's acute inflammation. And so, and this is, like it's definitely not comfortable and it's not fun. But acute inflammation isn't really something that we need to worry about ourselves too much. The main thing that we need to be concerned with, that is caused primarily due to a sedentary lifestyle, is chronic inflammation. And some factors that increase risk of chronic inflammation are obesity, stress, a poor diet. And this is really so imagine how much you love like a late night run to Taco Bell, or it's a bag of Doritos, or whatever your pleasure, right? Imagine how much you like that, and then give it to cortisol when you're sedentary, and it's going to have a field day, except you are not benefiting from this field day. So another factor that increases your risk of chronic inflammation are low sex hormones. And of course, like I keep saying, sedentary lifestyle. So if I haven't made it come across to you yet, being sedentary is not good for you. So before we move on from inflammation, I kind of just wanted to go a little further in detail about the differences of acute and chronic inflammation, right? Because when you say short-term inflammation, not given any other information, it's like how long is short-term, right? Is it an hour? Is it a day? Is it 2 days? Um, so I don't know if you've noticed. Normally, like when you look at something that deals with inflammation, be it like ibuprofen or a hydrocortisone cream, anything of the like, they usually say a few days. To put in a more concrete term, let's say 7 days, 1 week. If your inflammation lasts for more than 7 days, then it's probably no longer a case of acute inflammation. And so another thing with acute inflammation is within that period of a few days, it's probably going to improve and it's probably just going to go away. But if it doesn't go away, then it turns into chronic inflammation. Um, and so, the duration of chronic inflammation, it's like, okay, how long is a long time? And we're talking months to years. Um, if you don't do anything to get it under control, and you can have some really negative side effects to chronic inflammation in your body.
Fit recommendations for risk reduction of cancer. So for aerobic activity, they recommend 5 or more days per week of exercise at a moderate to vigorous intensity. Um, so, like we talked about before, a moderate intensity is when you can talk and exercise, but you cannot sing and exercise. And a vigorous intensity is when you cannot talk or sing while exercising. And then the time for exercising is at least 30 minutes per day. It is preferred to do 45 to 60 minutes though. Also, while doing this fit recommendation, you want to combine it with your usual daily activities. So, any household activities, occupational activities, transportational activities, you want to keep doing those while also doing this fit recommendation. All right, recommendations of physical activities that help reduce risk of cancer. So these are recommendations specifically from the article given to us for this topic. The first recommendation for moderate intensity activities is leisurely bicycling and canoeing. For vigorous intensity activities, they suggest fast bicycling, jogging, and jumping rope. For sports at a moderate intensity, they suggest downhill skiing and badminton. And for sports at a vigorous intensity, they suggest single tennis and cross country skiing. Of course, there are more activities you could do, but these are just some examples of activities you could do with the suggested intensity. Exercise during cancer treatment. Cancer treatment leads to fatigue, and then exercise gives an individual more energy. Exercise during cancer treatment also lowers the chance of having bad side effects from the cancer treatments. Some of these bad side effects are nausea, fatigue, lymphedema, and osteoporosis. Exercise during cancer treatment can also boost your mood. It can reduce feelings of anxiety and depression. Exercise during cancer treatment also helps keep a healthy weight. It helps prevent weight gain and weight loss, and it also helps prevent weight cycling, which is increasing and decreasing weight multiple times. Exercise during cancer treatment also helps keep an individual's strength. It prevents muscle loss and from the individual from becoming weak during their cancer treatments, because that is one of the side effects. Exercise also reduces the risk of other health issues and diseases during cancer treatment. Exercise can reduce the risk of heart disease and diabetes, and it is important for an individual going through cancer treatment to not deal with these other health issues because they want to stay as healthy as possible. The amount of exercise recommended weekly for someone going through cancer treatment is 3 to 5 hours. Even on days when an individual going through cancer treatment is feeling tired and weak, it is suggested that they still do their household duties and stay active. And if they can, still do their exercises, but maybe at half the intensity they normally would.
So we found a video that I think is a really good watch. I recommend if you watch it, at least for the amount that we're gonna show in the slideshow, and we're gonna provide a link as well if you wanted to watch the rest of the video. And this video is basically just about a personal experience of exercising during cancer treatment.
Chances are, when you hear the word cancer, you probably think of someone like this. Someone who is tired, someone who is sick, and someone who is very weak. But what if I told you that cancer could look like this? I'd like to tell you about my friend Patty. Patty was a wife, she was a mom of 2, she was a small business owner, and then at the age of 49, Patty was diagnosed with stage 4 colon cancer. She was given a 6% chance of surviving the year. In fact, her oncologist actually said to her, "We are just going to try and not let you die." Now, I think anyone facing a prognosis like that would easily fall into despair, but not Patty. You see, Patty didn't like the way cancer made her feel, and so she decided she didn't want to feel that way anymore. And so rather than focusing on all the things in her world that were spinning out of control, her cancer diagnosis, that it was so aggressive, that it would more than likely take her life, Patty decided to focus on all the things she could control. She could choose to exercise. Now, exercise might seem like the very last thing you'd want to do when you're facing a cancer diagnosis. I get it. In fact, for years, oncologists actually cautioned patients away from exercise because they were afraid that the increase in blood flow would cause cancer cells to spread throughout the body. But luckily, we've come a long way since then, and we now know that exercise helps to alleviate nearly every single negative side effect of cancer treatment. For example, 98% of patients experience fatigue. This fatigue is debilitating. It's a whole body fatigue, the kind where all you want to do is lie down and take a nap. And honestly, no one would blame you for that. In the summer of 2007, my grandfather was diagnosed with an aggressive form of cancer, and he experienced this kind of fatigue. Just a couple months earlier, he was able to walk 18 holes on the golf course. Now, suddenly, he didn't even have the energy to walk upstairs. So as you can imagine, this was very frustrating for him. Now, at the time of his diagnosis, I had been conducting research in the field of cancer and exercise for nearly 5 years. I had had the unique opportunity to study under Dr. Carol Schneider, who was a leading pioneer in this field. So I knew all about the science behind why exercise is beneficial in the life of someone battling cancer. This was my chance to see it play out in the life of somebody that I loved. And so I told my grandfather, every hour on the hour, we're going to take a walk. And I'd get him up out of bed, and he walked one lap around the downstairs of his house, and then he went back to bed. Now, to someone on the outside looking in, this would have looked like nothing. To my grandfather, this was everything.
Are some healthy diet recommendations for cancer. You do want to eat more plant-based products and avoid red meat and processed foods. If you do want to eat meat, maybe go for fish or chicken. When it comes to processed foods, try to avoid them as much possible and go for a homemade meal instead. Yes, it might take some time to prepare, but at least you will know what's going in them. If you are one who drinks alcohol, you are going to want to reduce the amount you drink daily. Men should have a max of 2 drinks daily, while women have a max of 1 drink, but it is preferred to have none.
Okay, so now that we've gone over, you know, a sedentary lifestyle versus a physical lifestyle and some other things that can make you more prone to cancer, we're going to talk about a few cancers that are particularly affected by having a sedentary lifestyle. So the first cancer we're going to be talking about is colon cancer. So colon cancer is basically a type of cancer that begins in your large intestine, which is your colon, or your rectum. So, you see it as colon cancer, but it can also be referred to as colorectal cancer. Some facts about colon cancer. It's the third most commonly diagnosed cancer for both men and women. In this year, 2020, approximately 140,000 cases will be diagnosed, and 56,000 of those people diagnosed are going to die from colon cancer. And so one of the kind of scary things about colon cancer is it's usually found pretty late, but not to be like too doom and gloom. Usually it's found in older individuals, and we know this, so we start, looking for signs of colon cancer once you're over the age of 50. So real quick before we go on, I kind of wanted to go over the colon and talk about the different portions of the colon. So that's assuming anatomical position, right? So you're gonna look at the left side of the picture, but this is the right side of the person. So if you were to touch the right side of your abdomen, that is kind of around where your ascending colon is. And so the function of your ascending colon is it basically absorbs the remaining water and other key nutrients from the material that your small intestine wasn't able to digest. And so once you go up the ascending colon, you go to the transverse colon, right? So it's this midline. It's basically cutting across your abdomen to put into perspective. And the transverse colon kind of does the same thing. It basically just absorbs more water as well as some salts in the foods that you ate. And then moving on to the descending colon. So this is starting on your left side and it's moving down. It's descending, right? And so the purpose of the descending colon is to store feces. And then below the descending colon is the sigmoid colon. And this contracts to increase the pressure inside of your colon to help move your bowel movements along. So now we're going to go further into colon cancer and the effects that a sedentary lifestyle can have on this. So one statistic that I found was basically that the risk of colon cancer is 30% higher among sedentary individuals. Literally, if those individuals just chose to be active, unless of course they don't have that choice. But in general, a lot of us do have that choice to be active in some shape or form. And this can, that's 30%. That's 30% chance you could not get colon cancer if you exercised, right? And so, moving on, sedentary behavior and physical inactivity has been shown to increase your blood glucose levels, and it also decreases your insulin sensitivity, as I talked about before, which leads to type 2 diabetes, chances of becoming obese, as well as increasing inflammation in your body. I wanted to discuss a little bit the differences between a sedentary behavior versus a sedentary lifestyle, because we're not up and running 24/7, right? Like, we have to sleep, you have to sit down at the table and have dinner with your family or your significant other or your roommate or whoever, right? You got to rest at some point. We all need rest. So I'm going to make a distinction between sedentary behaviors and a sedentary lifestyle. So some examples of a sedentary behavior would be binge watching Netflix. Another sedentary behavior could be playing World of Warcraft for 12 hours straight because a new expansion is coming out November 23rd. I wouldn't know anything about it, but I just read it on the internet. So there you go. Another example of sedentary behavior is, say you're going on a road trip or you're driving for a long period of time. This is considered a sedentary behavior. And so, on the contrary, a sedentary lifestyle, it's not just like one activity. It's how you're living your life. And so some of these examples that kind of give an example of a sedentary lifestyle are working a desk job, taking less than 5,000 steps per day. Also, if you're on bed rest or the equivalent for any reason, say you just had a surgery, this is at least for that period of time, because it's you're not just going to be on bed rest for 2 hours or 12 hours or whatever, right? You're going to be on bed rest for probably a few weeks. And so in that period of time, you're experiencing a sedentary lifestyle. So back on to the subject of the colon and colon cancer. I know it's kind of awkward, right? No one likes to talk about it. The internet says that girls don't poop. We know that's not true. But anyways, I wanted to, because one of the main purposes, besides absorbing water from the food that we eat, it's to store and move our feces along until we have a bowel movement. So some statistics for you. So 16% of Americans and 1/3 of Americans over the age of 60. So this is 16% of just Americans in general, and then 1/3, 30% of individuals over 60 years old experience chronic constipation. And so, kind of like I went over before, acute versus chronic, like this means these people are constipated all the time. And, one of the sad realities of this is because we, as Americans in general, are pretty sedentary. We're a pretty sedentary society, as opposed to, Europe or other countries. So, on the subject of poop, it's really important to look at your poop. So if you're constipated, some examples of poop when you're constipated, if you look at the Bristol stool chart, you'd see the types 1 and 2 there. Just super not comfortable, it doesn't look right, means you're constipated. You need to probably drink some more water and be a little more physically active. What you're aiming for are more along the, if you want to, consider something normal, you should look at types 3 and 4. Those are poop goals. Those are your poop goals. I'll talk a little bit more about the impacts that exercise has on colon cancer. So in general, normal physical activity has a greater effect on the distal colon than that of the proximal colon. And when we're talking about the distal colon, we're referring to closer to the rectum than to the beginning of the process, which would be your ascending colon. The one exception to this would be if you were to do inversions, these are commonly practiced in yoga, these actually have a greater effect on your proximal colon. And so why do you think this is? It's It's basically gravity, gravity one way or the other. If you have feces sitting in your descending colon, you go for a run. If you're having issues having bowel movements, go for a run and see what happens. And also, there have been studies that have shown regular inversions can actually really help with your digestion, as well as encouraging stool to move through your system. And so this is what exercise does. It increases the blood flow in your colon. It increases the oxygen to your large intestine. It aids in the process of peristalsis, which is basically just moving things along. And it keeps, you and your tummy happy. I'm going to talk a little bit about some evidence as to why physical activity helps prevent colon cancer. And so another statistic for you, actually before I go on to that, as we mentioned earlier in the presentation, up to 95% of all cases of cancer are due to lifestyle as well as environmental factors. And so when it comes to colon cancer in particular, your lifestyle factor, particularly your physical activity, this can prevent your chance of developing colon cancer by up to 15%. And also, as we've kind of basically been drilling into, regular physical activity helps combat those 5 major mechanisms that I talked about earlier. Weight gain, fat gain, inflammation, all of those things that are correlated with the risk of cancer. And so one of the main theories as to why chronic constipation causes colon cancer and a sedentary lifestyle is that it causes prolonged exposure between the colonic mucosa and carcinogens that are in your stool, because there's you don't really want to think about it, but the air we breathe, the food we eat, the water we drink, the sun that you love to bathe in, there's carcinogens, things that can cause cancer, and they enter your body and they can end up in your stool. And if you're chronically constipated, this can affect your colon and can lead to colon cancer.
Moving on to breast cancer. Breast cancer is a disease where the cells grow abnormally and uncontrollably. There are different types, which it depends on where the cells are growing on the breast tissue. And we all know that this type of cancer is usually diagnosed in women all over the world, but it can also affect men as well. And if men are affected, it's usually the older population. So breast cancer is also known as a hormone-related cancer, and this means that the cancer is caused by having high levels of estrogen, and I will be talking about some of the causes of high estrogen levels on the next slide. Now we are going to talk about some of the risk factors for breast cancer. First, we are going to talk about the risk factors for women. One of the causes is having a family history. So if people in your family have breast cancer, there is a high percentage that you might get it as well. If this is the cause, you might want to consider talking to your doctor and getting checked. As mentioned before, cancer is due to high levels of estrogen. Some of these include having an early menarche, so this is also known as a first period when you're younger than 11 years old. Early menopause, which is considered to be younger than 55 years. And having a late pregnancy, meaning your first pregnancy was when you were older than 30 years. Other risk factors include obesity and having a sedentary lifestyle. Now looking at the risk factors for men, as mentioned in the previous slide, this is going to affect the older population. Having high estrogen levels, meaning you have low male hormones is also a huge risk factor because by now we know that high estrogen levels causes breast cancer. Family history also applies to males. If breast cancer runs in the family, they are at risk for also having it. So other risk factors include obesity, liver disease, being a heavy drinker, exposed to radiation, and also having a sedentary lifestyle. Here are some signs and symptoms for breast cancer. If you notice a lump on the breast tissue, whether you have pain or not, if you notice a change in the shape or size, if you see your skin appearing scaly, red, or has darkened in color, or if it's swollen, if your breast tissue feels itchy, sore, and it feels scaly, or if you see a rash appearing. Another symptom is having swollen or enlarged lymph nodes, which also include the collarbone and armpits. So if you are experiencing any of these signs and symptoms, it is highly recommended that you talk to your doctor and get examined. There is also an at-home examination you can do yourself, which is provided on the right side, but you will get more accurate results by seeing a doctor. Moving on to the impact of exercise on breast cancer. So regular exercise is known to reduce the risk, but removing the tissue has a higher risk reduction. So regular exercise has a rate reduction of 10 to 30%. So if you are going to use regular exercise to reduce the risk, a longer duration of moderate to vigorous intensity is preferred. So the greatest reduction of risk was found in women who performed 7 or more hours of moderate to vigorous activity per week. So there was also a lower risk found in different ethnic and racial groups, and those who performed vigorous intensity over moderate intensity. Here are some statistics based on breast cancer. So 5 to 10% of cases are due to genetic defects, and the remaining 90 to 95% of cases are due to environmental and lifestyle factors. So this includes things such as cigarette smoking, diet, alcohol consumption, and obesity. That being said, 1 in 8 women in the United States will develop breast cancer in her lifetime.
Next, we are going to talk about endometrial cancer. So, what is endometrial cancer? Endometrial cancer is when cells in the endometrium start multiplying and growing out of control. The endometrium is located in the inner lining of the uterus. So, this cancer is specifically only to women because obviously men don't have uteruses. And what causes it? Scientists today are not sure what causes this cancer, but they do know that it is linked to obesity and hormone imbalance. And later on, in the next slide, I believe, we're going to talk about how obesity and hormone imbalance is linked to endometrial cancer. Okay, risk factors for endometrial cancer. The first risk factor is obesity. So, obesity is linked to an increased risk of developing endometrial cancer. This is because fat tissue can change hormones. They specifically change the hormone called androgens into estrogens, making estrogen levels higher, and this leads to an increased risk of endometrial cancer. Also, kind of like I talked about before, weight cycling also increases the risk for endometrial cancer, especially in older women after menopause. The next risk factor is anything that changes hormone levels. Um, So basically, anything that affects estrogen levels is going to increase a woman's risk for developing endometrial cancer. A woman's monthly cycle or period, basically, is what basically keeps the hormone balance between estrogen and progesterone, um, and it keeps the endometrium healthy. After menopause, estrogen is produced from the fat tissue in a woman's body instead of from the monthly cycle. The next risk factor is birth control. So, birth control actually decreases the risk of developing endometrial cancer, specifically in the pill and the non hormonal IUD. So the risk for the pill is lowest in women who take the pill for a long time, and then after they stop taking the pill, they have protection against risk for endometrial cancer for up to 10 years. And then for the IUD, it is only limited to the non-hormonal method. And then pregnancy also leads to a decreased risk for developing endometrial cancer. So women who have been pregnant multiple times have a lower risk of developing endometrial cancer compared to women who cannot get pregnant or have not been pregnant. The next risk factor is age. So with age, there is an increased risk of endometrial cancer. This is specifically because of menopause and the hormone balance in a woman's body. The next risk factor is diet and exercise. So, diet and exercise, depending on what the diet and the exercise is, can either lead to an increased risk or a decreased risk. So, for example, a high fat diet leads to an increased risk because they believe that more fat in a person's body like messes with the hormones in a person's body, and also because a lot of high fat diets lead to obesity, and obesity leads to an increased risk for developing endometrial cancer. But also, if you have a healthy diet and eat a lot of plant-based foods, then you have a decreased risk for endometrial cancer. And then for exercise, physical activity leads to a decreased risk in endometrial cancer. And then sedentary people, it will lead to an increased risk in endometrial cancer. And then the next risk factor is having other cancers in the past. So having other cancers in the past leads to an increased risk in endometrial cancer. And then having a family history also leads to an increased risk in endometrial cancer. This is because basically it's in your genes. Other people, like either your mom or your grandma, carried the gene for having endometrial cancer. So it's passed on to you, so you have a chance of having it. Endometrial cancer and a sedentary lifestyle. So endometrial cancer is found in places where a sedentary lifestyle is dominant. So it can be found in women who maybe have a desk job and then they come home and they're inactive and are sitting for long periods of the day after they even get home. Or maybe it's found in women who are not able to be active and have to sit around for long periods of the day. Women who were inactive and sat for 9 or more hours a day had twice the risk of endometrial cancer for an active woman who sat 3 or less hours a day. So women who were inactive and sat long periods of the day had twice the risk of an active woman who sat short periods in a day. This statistic should just show that it is very important to stay active throughout your day and not sit for long periods at a time. So even if it's just doing household activities, that will help prevent endometrial cancer. or help decrease the risk of developing endometrial cancer in the future. The impact of exercise on endometrial cancer. So, some studies have shown that higher levels of exercise are correlated with a reduced risk of developing endometrial cancer in women. Basically, what this is saying is higher levels of exercise, like higher intensity and even longer intervals of exercise, are correlated with a lower risk of developing endometrial cancer. Some studies have also found that there is a benefit of household physical activity and a benefit of transportation activity. So, some household physical activities are cleaning, it can even be cooking, things like that. So, some transportation activities are walking to work, biking to work, running to work, anything like that. Studies have also found that longer duration and higher intensity exercises lead to risk reduction. This is kind of like what we talked about in the first point. 1 hour daily of moderate intensity exercise is recommended to reduce the risk of endometrial cancer. So, if you remember, the general fit for exercise for someone who has cancer or to reduce the risk of getting cancer is at least 30 minutes a day and 45 to 60 minutes a day preferred. And this is stating that 1 hour daily of moderate intensity exercise is recommended for this type of cancer. Statistics on endometrial cancer. A study showed active women have a 30% lower risk of developing endometrial cancer. This could also mean that an inactive woman has a 70% higher risk of developing endometrial cancer. A review of a study showed a 20 to 30% risk reduction for physical active women, and the evidence was convincing or probable. This statistic was specifically taken from the chart showed before. And this is just saying that there's a 20 to 30% risk reduction for women who are active, and then that evidence that they found for physical activity preventing this cancer is convincing or probable. 40 to 50% of endometrial cancers may be due to too much body fat. This suggests that there needs to be a balance between energy expenditure and consumption. This just means that basically we need to watch what we eat, and then if we eat too much, we need to make sure that we're exercising throughout the day. There needs to be a balance between the energy that we're giving out of our body and then also what's coming into our body. Women who are overweight or obese are 3 times more at risk of developing endometrial cancer than healthy women. So a woman who is obese or overweight has a 3 times more likelihood of developing endometrial cancer when they compare it to a healthy woman. Alright, so a study I found on endometrial cancer analyzed the correlation between lifetime physical activity and endometrial cancer. 472 women in San Francisco that had been diagnosed with endometrial cancer were studied during this study. These women were 35 to 79 years old. From these women, they collected information on their background, their lifestyle, their diet, their exercise level, and other information about themselves. After the study was conducted, they found that Greater lifetime physical activity leads to reduced risk of developing endometrial cancer compared to those with low lifetime physical activity. So this means that people who exercised, or specifically women who exercised a greater amount of time within their lifetime, it showed that it led to a reduced risk of developing cancer compared to those who have exercised a little amount of time in their lifetime. Lung cancer. So we're briefly just going to go over some information about lung cancer and some statistics about lung cancer, but there isn't a lot. What is lung cancer? When abnormal cells in the lungs rapidly grow and divide at a rate that cells that are supposed to protect your body cannot keep up and fight the cancer. Who is affected? Men and women for this cancer are both affected. What leads to a higher risk of developing lung cancer? So, smoking leads to a higher risk, exposure to harmful substances, and age. So, for both smoking and exposure to harmful substances, when you're breathing in those toxic chemicals and things that are basically not supposed to be in your body, it can mutate your DNA, and this can cause cancer in the lungs. Lung cancer and exercise. So, lung cancer is the second most frequent diagnosed cancer. Little evidence suggests whether or not exercise can reduce the risk of lung cancer. And there's such little evidence because they have not done a lot of studies and paid a lot of attention between lung cancer and exercise. In one study, it suggested that recreational activity had a greater risk reduction than occupational. So, recreational activities are any outdoor activity for the purpose of exercising, and then occupational activities are activities that you would do at your job. So, it could be standing on your feet all day, walking around all day, things done at work. Some statistical evidence on lung cancer. 20 studies looked into the correlation between physical activity and lung cancer. In these studies, they found that 20 to 40% had a risk reduction, but only when smoking was controlled. And then statistics in these studies suggest that there is connection between the two, but right now there is limited evidence that there is actually a connection. But they think that if lung cancer and exercise are studied more and more studies are done on them, that eventually we will find that there is a correlation or even a preventative method between physical activity and lung cancer. All right, recommendations for the fight against cancer. So this slide is going to be a little bit of review and just wrapping up everything we've been talking about. So the first recommendation is to stay physically active. Like we talked about before, someone who is fighting against cancer or wants to prevent getting cancer with exercise, you want to exercise 5 or more days a week at a moderate to vigorous intensity for at least 30 minutes, but is preferred to exercise 45 to 60 minutes. And this is for aerobic activity. And then some other cancers have specific recommendations that they want you to exercise, but this is just a general recommendation for the fight against cancer. The next recommendation for the fight against cancer is to maintain a healthy weight throughout your life and avoid weight gain. So like we've talked about before, you want to someone who is trying to fight against cancer or prevent cancer, you want to avoid weight cycling. So, weight cycling is increasing or decreasing weight multiple times throughout your life. This isn't good. Obesity is not good and can increase your risk of developing cancer because obesity usually leads to high fat in a person's body, and then high fat uh, leads to hormone imbalances. The next recommendation for the fight against cancer is a healthy diet. So, it is important for people who are trying to fight against cancer, or for people in general, just to have a healthy diet, is to eat plant-based products and also limit your consumption of red meat. Also, you want to limit alcohol consumptions. So they recommend for men to only have 2 drinks daily and for women to only have 1 drink daily. Of course, there are other recommendations to help fight against cancers, especially specific cancers, but these are just the general recommendations that can help fight against cancer or any disease in general.
Here is a quick recap about what you just learned. So physical activity is associated with many health benefits. Cancer is a mutation in cell DNA which leads to irregular cells that multiply and causing tumors to form. Some of the causes of cancer are due to genetics, environmental, and lifestyle factors. Moderate and vigorous physical activity is recommended to help fight cancer and prevent cancer. Having a healthy diet and maintaining a healthy weight is important. Experiencing signs and symptoms, you should seek a doctor. And you should also avoid having a sedentary lifestyle.
And here are our references. If you have any questions, please don't hesitate to contact us. Thank you for watching.